It was a crisp Tuesday morning in Washington, D.C., when Caroline Levitt received the envelope. No knock, no call, just a beige folder slid under her office door with one word stamped in red across the front. Subpoena. Caroline paused, her hand frozen over her coffee cup. Liberty, her golden retriever service dog, lifted her head from the carpet. The silence between them felt heavier than usual. She opened the folder. It was a court summons for a case she hadn't been briefed on. In a district courthouse she rarely paid attention to. The only note was a line scribbled in ink. You're not just here to watch. You're here to answer. Strange. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't a witness. She was the press secretary to the President of the United States. But her name was printed in bold across the top, and the deadline was clear. Appear at 10 a.m. sharp. No explanation. No context. No time to ask questions. She texted Mark, her aide. Something's off. Pack Liberty's vest. We're heading to court. By 9:25, Caroline was in a dark SUV slicing through Capitol traffic. The city already awake with reporters and staffers buzzing outside the Hill. Liberty sat at her side, vest clipped, golden coat immaculate, eyes scanning the passing crowds. Caroline wore her signature navy blazer, a silver cross glinting from the collar. Not for show, for strength. She didn't know what was waiting for her in that courthouse, but she had a feeling it wasn't just a misunderstanding. At 9:58 a.m., she stepped through the courthouse doors. A security guard raised an eyebrow. Dogs aren't allowed, ma'am. She's a service animal. Federal clearance, Caroline replied, holding out ID and registration. Liberty stood calm, not moving a muscle. The guard nodded and waved them through. The courtroom was half full. Lawyers whispered in the front rows. A few journalists lingered in the back, typing quickly. But when Caroline entered, a few heads turned. Whispers began. That's her. Is that the White House rep? What's she doing here? Caroline took a seat near the front. Liberty sat beside her, back straight, gaze fixed. Then the judge walked in. He glanced around the room and paused. His eyes landed on the cross at Caroline's collar. And for a second, the entire courtroom held its breath. Judge Edgar Franklin wasn't known for subtlety. A former military prosecutor turned district judge, his reputation was sharp-edged, efficient, humorless, and a stickler for control. If something didn't belong in his courtroom, he didn't hesitate to remove it. Fast. He adjusted his glasses, glanced down at the papers in front of him, then looked back up at Caroline. The court recognizes Miss Caroline Leavitt, he said dryly. White House press secretary. Is that correct? Caroline stood. Yes, Your Honor. I was summoned this morning. I have not been informed of the reason. Judge Franklin nodded. You're here for observation and clarification. A recent federal communication referenced this courtroom in regard to religious expression. We'd like to know if your office intends to interfere. Interfere? Caroline tilted her head. I'm here because I was called. That is not interference. It's compliance. A few chuckles rippled from the back benches. Staffers, maybe, or press. Franklin tapped his gavel once. Very well. Take your seat. She did. Liberty didn't flinch. The hearing resumed, a seemingly routine case involving a zoning dispute. A Christian-run bakery had been fined for displaying a wooden cross in its shop window, allegedly violating signage rules. But Caroline quickly noticed something strange. The prosecution was aggressive, too aggressive for such a minor offense. The questions were sharp. The judge interrupted the defense repeatedly. When the bakery owner's lawyer tried to reference the First Amendment, Franklin rolled his eyes. Then, mid-hearing, Franklin's eyes drifted again. To Caroline. He spoke sharply. "Miss Levitt, a question for you." She stood. "Yes, Your Honor?" "That silver cross on your jacket. Is that an official part of your uniform?" Caroline blinked. It's a personal symbol of faith." Franklin leaned forward. "Then I suggest you remove it while seated in this courtroom. This is a place of law, not of religion." The room went dead silent. Even Liberty lifted her head. Caroline didn't move. She didn't blink. Instead, she answered calmly. "With respect, I wear this cross under protection of the First Amendment. It violates no dress code, and I won't be removing it." Franklin's jaw tightened. "I said this courtroom is not a church." "And I said nothing about turning it into one," Caroline replied, still calm. Liberty, still sitting, rose quietly to her feet. No bark, no growl, just stood. The judge stared at the dog. Everyone did. Something in the room shifted. It wasn't just the cross anymore. It was the challenge. And Caroline had just drawn the line. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension in the room pulsed like a drumbeat beneath the silence. Liberty stood tall beside Caroline, alert, unmoving, like a statue carved from golden resolve. Judge Franklin stared at the dog with thinly veiled irritation. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked sharply. Caroline didn't flinch. "She's trained to rise when I'm under stress, or when the environment becomes hostile. She's a service animal, not a pet." The judge narrowed his eyes. "And you claim this court is hostile?" "I don't claim anything," she replied. "She responds on instinct." There was an edge to her voice now, still respectful, still measured, but unmistakably firm. The gallery buzzed with whispers. A few journalists began typing furiously. A court clerk paused her typing, watching intently. The bakery owner at the center of the case turned to glance at Caroline, his eyes wide with surprise, maybe hope. Judge Franklin exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. "I will not tolerate outbursts, even from animals." Caroline's response came cool and steady. She didn't make a sound, and she hadn't. That, perhaps, was what made it more unsettling. Franklin turned his attention back to the proceedings, but the energy in the room had changed. What had been a simple hearing was now something more, a symbol, a confrontation, a moment people would remember. The prosecutor resumed questioning the bakery owner, trying to steer the focus back to zoning violations. But the witness stumbled over his words, clearly rattled by what had just unfolded. Franklin interrupted again, scolding the defense for irrelevant constitutional commentary. Caroline listened carefully. Her expression gave nothing away, but inside she was piecing something together. This wasn't about a zoning violation. It was about setting a precedent. If this court could punish someone for displaying a cross in a business window, how far would it go? Would a service dog rising in protest be next? The prosecutor pressed harder. "Did you display that cross with the intent to provoke?" The bakery owner's lawyer objected. "Irrelevant." "Overruled," Franklin snapped. Caroline's fingers tapped her notepad. Liberty didn't sit back down, and in the back of the room, a young woman, likely a law student, whispered to her colleague, "This isn't about the bakery anymore." The courtroom doors creaked as someone entered quietly from the back. A woman, mid-60s, glasses, gray blazer, clutched a manila folder to her chest and moved toward the clerk's desk. She leaned in, whispered something, and handed over the folder. The clerk read the label, eyes widening slightly, then stood and walked the file straight to the defense attorney. Caroline watched the exchange closely. Judge Franklin's eyes followed the movement, too. "What's that?" he asked. "Your Honor," the defense attorney said, adjusting his glasses, "this file was just submitted by a former city employee. It contains internal emails and inspection records from the zoning department, documents that may show a pattern of selective enforcement, particularly against religious symbols." The room buzzed. The judge banged his gavel once. Silence. Caroline's heart beat faster. Liberty, still standing, tilted her head toward the folder, sensing the shift in energy. The quiet wasn't just awkward anymore. It was expectant. "Who delivered this?" Franklin asked, voice tight. "Dorothy Harris," the defense replied. "Retired senior zoning inspector." "She's here, Your Honor." Franklin frowned. "She's not on the witness list." "She came voluntarily." There was a pause. Then Franklin said coldly, "Fine. Let her speak." Dorothy took the stand, hands slightly shaking, but her voice, soft and even, carried through the courtroom. "I worked in zoning enforcement for 22 years, she said. "Last year, I noticed we were flagging businesses with crosses or faith-based signs more often than others. I questioned it. I was told to let it go." She looked at the judge directly. "I didn't. I kept the emails." Caroline felt her stomach tighten. This was bigger than expected. Franklin looked pale. "These documents are unverified," he muttered. "They're time-stamped," the attorney countered, "from city servers." Franklin adjusted his robe. "We'll take a recess to review." But before he could bang the gavel, Caroline stood. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "with all due respect, this case isn't just about what's legal anymore. It's about what's visible." He scowled. "Miss Levitt, you're not counsel." "No, but I am watching, and so is everyone else." Liberty didn't move, but her stillness was louder than any protest. The judge looked at the dog again, then down at his bench. And for the first time, he didn't look in control. Judge Franklin didn't recess the court. Instead, he sat there for a long moment, silent, staring at the bench like it might give him a way out. The courtroom waited. Breath held. Even the scribbling of pens had stopped. Finally, he spoke. "This court will take a brief 15-minute recess to review the submitted materials." The gavel struck. People began to stir. Conversations erupted in hushed tones. Reporters slipped out into the hallway to get their tweets and headlines out first. Liberty remained standing until Caroline gently motioned her back down. She lowered herself beside her chair with grace, head on her paws, eyes never leaving the front of the room. Mark appeared at Caroline's side, phone in hand. "We've got viral lift. Your quotes everywhere. It's not just about what's legal, it's about what's visible." Trending under #courtroom silence. Caroline didn't smile. "This isn't about trending," she said softly. "This is about making sure people see what really happens in rooms like this." A young woman, possibly a law clerk or an intern, approached hesitantly. "Miss Levitt, I've never seen someone do what you just did. Not like that." "I didn't do anything," Caroline replied. "I just didn't back down." Liberty nudged her foot gently, like she agreed. When the recess ended, Judge Franklin returned. His face was more pale now, and he no longer carried the air of command he had earlier. His robe looked heavier on his shoulders, his steps slower. He sat down and cleared his throat. "The court has reviewed the documents provided by Mrs. Harris. While further verification is needed, the content raises serious questions regarding fairness and bias." The defense attorney stood. "Then we request immediate suspension of enforcement actions against the defendant and a formal review of the zoning department's practices. Franklin hesitated, then nodded. Request granted. This court recognizes the need for further investigation. Gasps, murmurs. Someone in the gallery clapped before quickly stopping. Caroline didn't move. She simply looked at the judge. He met her gaze for half a second, then quickly turned away. Liberty stood again, slow, steady. Not in alarm, but like she understood something had shifted. The courtroom wasn't just listening anymore. It was watching. The courtroom emptied slowly, like a storm cloud that hadn't finished raining. People didn't rush out. They lingered, spoke in hushed voices. Some approached the bakery owner to shake his hand. Others glanced at Caroline and Liberty with a mix of curiosity and awe, as if they'd witnessed something more than legal procedure. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. News vans lined the curb. Reporters adjusted microphones. A few protesters, both for and against the case, held signs with slogans like "Keep Faith Free" and "Separation means separation." Caroline stepped out with Liberty at her side. Flashbulbs popped instantly. "Miss Levitt, what's your reaction to the judge's ruling? Did you anticipate the judge changing course? Was Liberty's behavior planned?" Caroline raised one hand calmly. The crowd fell quiet. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about the people in that courtroom who realized silence can carry more truth than shouting." That quote would become a headline within the hour. She didn't take more questions. Instead, she let Liberty guide her through the crowd. The golden retriever walked proudly, weaving between reporters, press cords, and camera flashes like she'd done it her whole life. Inside the SUV, Mark was already reading headlines. "The cross that stopped a courtroom." "Caroline Levitt faces down bias, without a word." This is everywhere. Caroline looked out the window at the courthouse behind them. "Good," she said. "Let them see it." By the time she returned to the White House, her inbox was overflowing. Emails from disability rights groups, legal scholars, clergy, even a few unlikely allies across the aisle. One note stood out. It was from a young girl in Indiana. "I wear a cross too. Kids at school laugh at it. But today, I wore it anyway." "Thank you," Caroline read the message twice, then glanced down at Liberty, who was now curled up beneath her desk. "You did good today," she whispered. Liberty didn't move, but Caroline didn't need a response. She'd already heard all she needed, through the silence. Within 48 hours, the ripple effects had reached Capitol Hill. A bipartisan group of lawmakers called for a formal review of zoning enforcement practices across major cities. The footage of the courtroom moment, when Liberty stood and the judge paused, had been played on every major news network. It wasn't just trending anymore, it was turning into momentum. Caroline sat in a small conference room inside the White House, watching quietly as legal analysts debated her courtroom stance on a live broadcast. "She didn't defy the court," one panelist said. "She revealed it." Outside that room, staffers buzzed, phones rang constantly, and media requests poured in. But Caroline remained centered, composed, focused. A knock at the door. It was Mark. "Judicial Ethics Board is convening a special hearing. Not just about Franklin. 3 other judges are under review for similar behavior." Caroline nodded. "Good. They need to know someone's watching." She paused. "Let them know I'll attend." Mark blinked. "You want to testify?" "I want them to hear the silence up close." Later that week, she entered a smaller, more formal hearing room, this time as a participant, not just a witness. She wore the same navy blazer, the same silver cross. Liberty walked beside her, steady and silent. The panel of ethics officials welcomed her. She gave a short, prepared statement, but it wasn't flashy. No dramatics, just facts, constitutional principles, and one unshakable truth. If the courtroom isn't safe for quiet belief, it isn't safe at all. One of the panelists leaned forward. "Do you believe what happened in that room was targeted?" Caroline didn't hesitate. "I believe it was tolerated, and that's just as dangerous." Liberty remained motionless, but once again her presence filled the room. Afterward, as Caroline walked back through the hallway, she passed a group of young law students. One of them stepped forward, hesitant. "Miss Levitt, I want to clerk for a judge someday, but after this, I want to become one." Caroline smiled slightly. "Make sure you're the kind who listens," she said. Even when the room goes quiet, the ethics hearing made national headlines. Judge Franklin was formally reprimanded for biased conduct. The zoning department's inspection records were released to the public. Dozens of cases surfaced, revealing a pattern of unequal enforcement tied to religious displays. Within days, the City Council passed emergency legislation to protect faith-based expression in public-facing businesses. Caroline didn't celebrate. She didn't tweet. She didn't even issue a statement. Instead, she met privately with the bakery owner at the center of the case. He brought cookies. She brought liberty. "I thought we'd lose everything," he said. "And now, people are calling from all over the country, not just to support, but to order." Caroline smiled. Sometimes you win just by standing still. Liberty, sitting at her feet, wagged her tail once. Later that evening, Caroline received a formal invitation from the National Constitution Center. They wanted her to speak at their annual summit on the future of civil liberties. Mark looked over the email. "Want me to decline? I know how you feel about the spotlight." Caroline paused. "Number, I'll do it." At the summit, she stood at the podium under warm lights, facing a room of scholars, activists, and law students. "I'm not a judge. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just someone who walked into a courtroom wearing a cross and didn't take it off," she began. The audience leaned in. "I didn't speak loudly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Because sometimes, silence carries more weight than noise." She looked down briefly at Liberty, who lay beside the podium, calm as ever. "This is Liberty," she said. "She doesn't bark. She doesn't bite. She just stands when something isn't right." Applause didn't erupt. It swelled, slowly, steadily, building into a standing ovation. Not because she shouted, but because she didn't. A week after the summit, Caroline's quiet stand had become something more. It was a movement. Clips of her speech circulated across platforms, not as political fuel, but as inspiration. People began sharing photos of their own faith symbols: crosses, Star of David necklaces, hijabs, Buddhist prayer beads. Alongside each image, a common caption emerged: "I stand, too." Even schools and workplaces that once discouraged visible signs of belief now faced public pressure to revisit their policies. Local courts across the country started reviewing their codes of conduct regarding religious expression, many of them prompted by Caroline's testimony. She hadn't intended any of it. In fact, she avoided most of the media offers. Talk shows called. Op-eds were requested. Cable networks wanted an exclusive. She declined them all. "I've said what I needed to," she told Mark. "Now it's their turn." But she did accept one invitation, a town hall at a law school in Virginia. The event wasn't televised. No lights, no cameras, just students, professors, and a small folding chair next to Liberty's. The questions weren't easy. How do we stand for belief without silencing others? What if your silence is seen as provocation? What happens when no one listens? Caroline answered each one thoughtfully. You don't stand to provoke. You stand to protect, she said. You can't control how they see you, only how you carry yourself. And if no one listens, you stand anyway. Liberty rested her chin on Caroline's boot as she spoke. Just listening. Just being there. After the event, a student approached with teary eyes. I've always hidden my necklace during exams. Thought it would make professors judge me. But next week, I'm wearing it. Caroline didn't say much. She just nodded. Because in that moment, no speech could compete with what had already been said. 3 months had passed since that courtroom moment. The headlines had faded. The hearings were over. The protests quieted. But something deeper remained. Something you couldn't track with hashtags or polls. Caroline Levitt stood at her office window overlooking Pennsylvania Avenue. Liberty lay nearby, dozing in a patch of afternoon light. The room was peaceful, still. A framed photo sat on her desk. It wasn't of her or the president. It was a grainy black and white still, captured by a court camera, of Liberty standing beside her, eyes locked on the judge. The moment before, everything changed. A knock came. It was Mark. There's something you should see, he said, holding out a letter. It was handwritten, ink slightly smudged. From a judge in Idaho. I watched what happened. I used to scoff at service animals and courtroom expressions of faith, but I've changed. Your silence taught me more than any ruling ever did. I now wear a small cross on my robe chain, not to make a statement, but to remember humility. Thank you for reminding us what justice looks like when it listens. Caroline folded the letter carefully. No applause, no cameras, just the quiet weight of impact. Later that evening, she took Liberty out for a walk, not in her work shoes, not in a press suit, but in jeans and a windbreaker. The city felt less harsh in those moments, more human. At a quiet intersection, a young mother approached, holding the hand of a little boy. The child looked up, wide-eyed at Liberty. Is she the one from the courtroom? He asked. Caroline knelt down. She is. Is she a hero? Caroline smiled. No, she said softly. She just stood when it mattered. The boy nodded like that was enough. And it was. As they walked on, Caroline glanced at the cross on her collar. It was the same one she'd worn that day. The same one that hadn't needed defending, just presence. Because in the end, it wasn't about speaking louder, being bolder, or winning arguments. It was about standing, quietly, steadily, unwavering, when it counted most. And in that silence, 1,000 voices were heard. In a world where people often shout to be heard, one woman reminded us that silence can be the loudest voice in the room. Caroline Levitt didn't storm in with fury. She didn't argue. She didn't demand. She simply stood, with quiet strength, with unwavering faith, and with a dog who understood everything without a single word. That courtroom didn't change because of outrage. It changed because truth held its ground, because courage wore a cross and calm held the leash. Liberty didn't bark. She stood. And in that single act, something shifted. Not just in a courtroom, but in a country. Maybe the lesson isn't to shout louder. Maybe it's to listen deeper, to feel the weight of what's right, and to know that sometimes the most powerful protest is presence. So ask yourself, when the moment comes, will you have the courage to stand? If this story moved you, subscribe for more stories like this one. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever made a difference without saying a word? At Surprising Stories, we believe that quiet can shake the world. One story at a time.